What would you do if 3 children, not from this world, showed up at your door in the middle of the night, terrified, lost, and glowing faintly under the moonlight? For Kalen, it started as an ordinary evening. He had just returned to his quiet home on the outskirts of a desolate town, far from the chaos of the galaxy. The last thing he expected was to hear a knock on the door, and certainly not to open it to find 3 small, green-skinned children staring up at him with wide, fearful eyes. They couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, but there was something in their gaze, something ancient, powerful, and desperate. Who were they? Where had they come from? And most importantly, why did they seem to be running from something, or someone, far more dangerous than Kalen could imagine? As the night deepened, Kalen realized that taking them in was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the universe, and about himself. What happens when the most extraordinary responsibility falls into your hands, and you're forced to face the unknown? Chapter 1. The Sands of Zara-Th Prime. The desert winds howled across the endless dunes of Zara-Th Prime, carrying with them the scent of scorched sand and the whisper of a forgotten past. Beneath the blistering sun, Kalen tightened his scarf around his neck, feeling the sting of heat even through the layers of protective gear he wore. The landscape stretched in every direction, barren and lifeless, with the horizon shimmering like an illusion under the oppressive rays. Kalen was no stranger to desolate worlds. In fact, he preferred them. They reminded him of the simplicity of survival, one either endured or one perished. And Kalen had spent a lifetime enduring. A former bounty hunter with a dark past, he had learned to navigate the galaxy's most hostile environments with nothing but his wits and a blaster by his side. But today, something about Zara-Th Prime felt different. The air carried a tension, an unspoken warning that gnawed at the back of his mind. He had come to this forgotten corner of the galaxy in search of parts for his ship, which had seen better days. The marketplace in Zara-Th Prime's capital city, Zeresh, was renowned for its black market trade, particularly in salvaged alien technology. Kalen had traded a week's worth of supplies for a tip about an ancient wreckage out in the desert. A fallen ship from the days of the Zyran Empire, the long-dead civilization whose remnants still sparked the imaginations and greed of scavengers, archaeologists, and criminals alike. The Zyran Empire, as the stories went, had once ruled vast swaths of the galaxy, their technology and culture far surpassing anything known today. But their empire had collapsed, their people vanishing almost overnight. All that was left were myths, ruins, and occasional scraps of their once mighty ships scattered across forgotten planets like Zara-Th Prime. As Kalen crested the next dune, the shape of the wreckage came into view. It was massive, the skeleton of a ship half buried in the sand, its metallic hull glinting in the harsh sunlight. The sight was both awe-inspiring and tragic, a monument to a lost era, now reduced to nothing more than a scavenger's prize. Kalen dismounted from his hovercraft, pulling out his scanning device to check for any life forms or energy signatures. The scanner beeped softly, indicating that most of the ship's systems were dead, as expected. But there was something, faint, almost imperceptible, a pulse of energy deep within the wreckage. Frowning, Kalen adjusted the scanner, trying to pinpoint the source. The signal was weak, but it was there. Something, or someone, was still alive inside. His heart quickened with a mixture of excitement and caution. If there were survivors, or worse, looters, it could complicate things. But the pulse didn't feel like the signature of a person. It was too erratic, too unstable. He drew his blaster and made his way toward the gaping hole in the side of the ship, where the hull had been torn open during the crash. The interior was dark, save for the occasional flicker of malfunctioning lights. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of rust and decay. Kalen moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. Every step echoed in the silence, and the only sound apart from his footsteps was the low hum of residual energy still clinging to the ship's systems. He passed through what appeared to be a cargo hold, the walls lined with crates bearing the ancient Zyran symbols he had seen in old texts and databanks. Most of the crates had been smashed open, their contents long gone, but some remained intact. His scanner beeped again, more insistently this time. The signal was stronger now, and it was close. Very close. Kalen followed the signal deeper into the wreck, descending a set of stairs that led to a lower deck. The temperature dropped slightly as he went further inside, the cool air a welcome relief from the desert heat. But it also made the silence more oppressive, more suffocating. At the end of the corridor, he found the source of the signal. A heavy door, partially ajar, led into what looked like a containment chamber. Inside, the room was dimly lit, but Kalen could make out the shape of something, or rather, someone, huddled in the far corner. His breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer, his blaster raised. The figures in the corner were small, too small to be adults. And as the dim light revealed more, Kalen's heart skipped a beat. 3 children. No, not children. Their skin was green, shimmering with a faint iridescence that reminded Kalen of the stories he had heard about the Zyrans, the last remnants of their people, scattered across the galaxy. They were triplets, by the look of them. Each of the children was huddled together, their small bodies curled in a protective embrace. Their clothes were torn, and their faces were streaked with dirt, but their eyes, when they opened them, were wide and alert, filled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Kalen lowered his blaster, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected to find survivors, let alone Zyran children. The myths had always spoken of the Zyrans as being long gone, their bloodlines extinguished. Yet here they were, 3 living reminders of a civilization thought lost to time. The oldest of the 3, a boy, stood up first. His eyes, a deep emerald green, locked onto Kalen's. He didn't speak, but there was something in his gaze that made Kalen pause, an intelligence far beyond his years, as though he were sizing Kalen up, determining whether he was a threat. The second child, a girl, clung to her brother's side, her eyes flickering with a faint glow that reminded Kalen of the Zyran symbols etched into the walls of the ship. The third, another boy, remained huddled on the floor, his small frame trembling as he stared at Kalen with wide, fearful eyes. Kalen holstered his blaster and took a step closer. "Hey," he said softly, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The children didn't respond, but the older boy's gaze never wavered. Kalen could see the gears turning in his mind, as if he were weighing his options. "I'm going to get you out of here," Kalen continued, kneeling down to meet the boy's gaze. "You're not safe here. There are people, bad people, who are going to come looking for you. But I can help." The boy hesitated, then glanced at his siblings. The girl, still clinging to his arm, nodded slightly, as if giving him permission. The younger boy, however, remained silent, his eyes wide with fear. Kalen reached out his hand, offering it to the older boy. "Trust me," he said quietly. "We don't have much time." For a moment, Kalen thought the boy would refuse. But then, slowly, the boy reached out and took Kalen's hand. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. Kalen felt a surge of relief as he helped the boy to his feet. The girl followed, her grip on her brother never loosening. The youngest child still hesitated, his eyes darting between Kalen and his siblings. "It's okay," Kalen said gently. "I've got you." He reached out to the younger boy, and after a long, tense moment, the child finally took his hand. Kalen lifted him into his arms, feeling the boy's small frame tremble against him. "We need to move fast," Kalen said, his voice low. "There are people coming." With the triplets in tow, Kalen led them back through the wreckage, his heart pounding in his chest. The scanner had already picked up signs of life approaching from the north, likely scavengers or bounty hunters drawn by the rumors of the Zyran ship. Kalen had no doubt they would be looking for the same thing he had found, and if they discovered the children, it would be over. They reached the hovercraft just as the first signs of movement appeared on the horizon, dark shapes silhouetted against the burning sun. Kalen's heart raced as he helped the children into the craft, his eyes darting between the approaching figures and the controls. He revved the engine, the hovercraft lifting off the sand with a low hum. The children huddled together in the back, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Kalen glanced over his shoulder, offering them what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Hold on," he said, gripping the controls tightly. "We're getting out of here." As the hovercraft sped across the dunes, the figures on the horizon grew larger, their forms more distinct. Kalen could make out the gleam of metal, armor, weapons, vehicles. They were closing in fast, but Kalen was faster. The hovercraft surged forward, the wind whipping through Kalen's hair as they raced across the desert. Behind them, the scavengers gave chase, but they were no match for Kalen's speed and experience. Within minutes, the shapes on the horizon began to fade, disappearing into the distance. Kalen breathed a sigh of relief, his grip on the controls relaxing slightly. They were safe, for now, but as he glanced back at the children, he knew that this was only the beginning. The triplets were more than just survivors of a wreckage. They were the last heirs to the Zyran Empire, and their fate would change the course of the galaxy forever, and Kalen, whether he liked it or not, had just become a part of their story. Chapter 2, The Secrets of the Zyran. Kalen had traveled the galaxy far and wide, but nothing had prepared him for the enormity of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. The 3 children he had found in the wreckage of the ancient Zyran ship were more than just survivors. They were the last of their kind, heirs to an empire long forgotten by most, but whispered about in the darkest corners of the galaxy. He knew that hiding them was only a temporary solution. If the word got out, it would unleash a wave of bounty hunters, syndicates, and power-hungry warlords, all eager to get their hands on the children. The power that flowed through their veins, Zyran blood, was too valuable. Whoever controlled them would wield influence and authority that could reshape the galaxy. The children, Ion, Kale, and Rhea, were quiet on the journey back to Kalen's hideout on the fringes of Zarath Prime. Though their eyes were full of curiosity, Kalen could sense the weight of their fear. They had been alone for so long, isolated in the wreckage, clinging to the remnants of a ship that had been their only protection. And now, in the care of a man they didn't know, they were faced with an uncertain future. Kalen's hideout was a small, inconspicuous outpost, hidden away in a rocky valley where the desert winds could not reach. It was a place he had built over the years as a refuge from the law, a place where no one could find him. It was modest, little more than a few rooms carved into the rock, but it had everything they needed to survive: food, water, and a communication jammer that would prevent anyone from tracing their location. As he led the children inside, Kalen could feel their unease. Ion, the eldest, glanced around the room with sharp, calculating eyes. He was protective of his younger siblings, especially Rhea, who stayed close to him at all times. Kale, the middle child, was quieter, more reserved, but there was a glimmer of mischief in his eyes that reminded Kalen of himself as a boy. Kalen busied himself preparing food while the children sat on a makeshift couch in the corner, watching him with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. He could feel their eyes on him as he moved about, but they remained silent, communicating with each other in a language Kalen couldn't understand, one that was soft, melodic, and distinctly alien. Finally, Kalen sat down across from them, setting plates of food on the table. "You need to eat," he said gently. "You've been through a lot." Ion eyed the food warily, but Kale, perhaps driven by hunger, reached for a piece of bread. Rhea followed suit, though her movements were more hesitant. Ion, after a moment's pause, began to eat as well. Kalen watched them for a moment before speaking again. "I'm sure you have questions," he said. "And I wish I had answers for you. But the truth is, I don't know much about the Zyrans. Only what I've heard in stories. But I do know one thing: you're not safe out there. People are going to come looking for you, and they won't stop until they find you." Ion looked up from his plate, his green eyes locking onto Kalen's. "Who are you?" His voice was quiet but firm, and though he spoke in the common language of the galaxy, there was a faint accent that Kalen couldn't place. Kalen leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "My name's Kalen. I used to be a bounty hunter, but now I keep to myself. I found you out there in the wreckage, because I was looking for parts for my ship. But when I saw you 3, well, I couldn't just leave you there." Ion's gaze remained steady, and for a moment, Kalen felt as though the boy were peering into his soul, searching for any sign of deception. Finally, Ion spoke again. "We're the last of our kind, aren't we?" Kalen hesitated, then nodded. "I think so." Rhea, who had been quiet up until now, shifted closer to Ion, her small hand gripping his sleeve. "What happened to our parents?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kalen's heart clenched at the question. He didn't have the answers they were looking for, and he wasn't sure he ever would. "I don't know," he said softly. "But we'll find out, I promise." For a moment, silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft hum of the outpost's power systems. Kaylin could see the weight of the children's grief, their confusion, their fear. They had lost everything, and now they were thrust into a world they didn't understand, surrounded by dangers they couldn't yet comprehend, but Kaylin was determined to protect them, no matter the cost. Chapter 3, The Shadow of the Syndicate. Kaylin wasn't the only one who knew of the Zyran wreckage. Far across the galaxy, deep within the underbelly of a sprawling space station known as Korhal, the Syndicate had received word of a discovery that would change the balance of power in the galaxy. Korhal was a place where criminals, mercenaries, and warlords gathered, far from the reach of the Galactic Council. And at the center of its dark web of power was Dravik, the leader of the Syndicate and one of the most feared men in the galaxy. Dravik sat in his private chambers, his eyes gleaming as he watched the grainy holovid footage of the Zyran wreckage. His sources had been clear: there were survivors. Children, no less. And they were Zyran, the last of their kind. The possibilities were endless. Whoever controlled the Zyran bloodline would hold the keys to unimaginable power, power that had been lost for centuries. "Send out the hunters," Dravik growled to his second-in-command, a towering brute of a man named Varys. "I want those children alive." Varys nodded, his expression grim. "And the one who found them?" Dravik waved a hand dismissively. "Kill him. But bring the children to me." Varys bowed slightly before leaving the room, his footsteps echoing through the chamber. Dravik leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile playing on his lips. The galaxy was about to change, and he would be at the center of it. Chapter 4, The Bond Between Them. Back on Zara-Th Prime, Kaylin was beginning to learn more about the triplets. They were incredibly intelligent, far more so than any human children their age. They absorbed information quickly, their minds working in ways Kaylin couldn't quite understand. They had a bond between them, one that went beyond mere sibling connection. It was as if they could communicate without words, their thoughts flowing between them in a way that defied explanation. It became clear to Kaylin that they possessed abilities far beyond anything he had ever seen. Ion, the eldest, could move objects with his mind, though he was still learning to control it. Kale, the middle child, had a way of manipulating matter. He could change the shape of objects, bending them to his will. And Rhea, the youngest, had a calming presence, one that seemed to influence not just her brothers, but Kaylin as well. She had a way of soothing emotions, easing tension with just a touch or a glance, but these abilities came with a price. The children were still learning to control their powers, and Kaylin could see the strain it put on them. Ion, in particular, was struggling. He felt the weight of responsibility for his siblings, and Kaylin could see how it wore on him. One evening, as the sun began to set over the desert, Kaylin found Ion sitting alone on the outpost's roof, staring out at the horizon. The boy's expression was troubled, his green eyes dark with worry. Kaylin sat down beside him, careful not to intrude on his space. "You're carrying a lot on your shoulders," he said quietly. Ion didn't look at him. "I'm the eldest. It's my job to protect them." "You don't have to do it alone," Kaylin said gently. "I'm here to help." Ion's gaze finally shifted to Kaylin, his expression hard. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know who we are." Kaylin sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't need to know who you are to want to help. You're just kids. You didn't ask for any of this." Ion's eyes narrowed. "We're not just kids. We're Zyran." Kaylin nodded. "I know. But that doesn't change the fact that you're still children. And no matter who you are, you deserve to be safe." For a moment, Ion was silent, his eyes searching Kaylin's face. Then, finally, he spoke. "Thank you," he said softly. Kaylin smiled, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll figure this out together. I promise." As they sat in the fading light, Kaylin couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy was closing in on them. The Syndicate, the bounty hunters, the unknown dangers lurking in the shadows, they were all out there, waiting for the moment to strike, but for now, at least, they had each other. Chapter 5. The chase begins. Kalen's peaceful hideout had once been a fortress of solitude, a sanctuary where no one could find him. But as the days wore on, the looming threat of discovery grew heavier, like a shadow creeping across the desert. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone, or something, came for the children. He could feel the tension in the air, and it set his instincts on edge. The syndicate wouldn't give up easily, not when the prize was so valuable. The triplets, for all their intelligence and powers, were still children. They were fragile, and the weight of their identity was a burden they weren't fully prepared to carry. Kalen had begun training them in small ways, teaching them how to use their powers sparingly, how to blend in, and how to move without drawing attention. But no amount of training could fully prepare them for what was coming. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a small, buzzing drone that hovered at the edge of Kalen's outpost one night. It was almost invisible against the dark sky, its metallic surface reflecting the faint moonlight. Kalen spotted it while on his nightly patrol, a routine he had adopted since the arrival of the children. His heart sank as he aimed his blaster at the drone and shot it out of the sky with a single, precise shot. The explosion was small, but it sent a clear message: they had been found. He rushed inside, where Ion, Kale, and Rhea were playing a quiet game in the corner of the room. Their innocence in that moment, their laughter and playful banter, cut through him like a knife. They had no idea how close danger was. "We have to go," Kalen said, his voice urgent. The triplets stopped their game and looked at him, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. "What happened?" Ion asked, his voice steady, despite the growing tension in the room. Kalen didn't waste time explaining. "Pack your things. We leave in 5 minutes." The children, sensing the gravity of the situation, moved quickly. They had learned to trust Kalen's instincts, and they didn't ask questions. Within minutes, they had gathered their belongings, what little they had, and were ready to leave. Kalen led them to the hovercraft, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. He knew the drone had been a scout, a tool used to locate them. The real danger was still out there, and it wouldn't be long before the syndicate's forces arrived. As they sped across the desert, the wind whipping through their hair, Kalen could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had been in tight spots before, fleeing bounty hunters, dodging the law, but this felt different. This wasn't just about his survival anymore. The lives of the children, the last heirs to the Zyran Empire, were in his hands. They traveled through the night, the vast desert stretching out in all directions like an ocean of sand. Kalen had no destination in mind, only the instinct to keep moving, to stay ahead of their pursuers. The hovercraft hummed beneath them, a small bubble of safety in the otherwise hostile landscape. By dawn, they had reached the rocky canyons to the north, a labyrinth of cliffs and caves that would provide some cover. Kalen brought the hovercraft to a stop, turning to face the triplets. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said. "But we can't stay long." Ion, always the most perceptive of the three, met Kalen's gaze. "They found us, didn't they?" Kalen nodded. "The syndicate. They sent a drone to scout the outpost. It's only a matter of time before they send their forces." Kale, who had been quiet throughout the journey, spoke up. "What do they want with us?" Kalen hesitated. He had been honest with the children so far, but the full extent of the truth was hard to explain. "They want your power. The Zyran bloodline carries with it abilities and knowledge that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. If the syndicate gets their hands on you, they'll use that power for their own purposes." Rhea, her small hand clutching Ion's sleeve, looked up at Kalen with wide, innocent eyes. "Will they hurt us?" Kalen knelt down in front of her, his expression softening. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The children nodded, trusting him completely. Kalen's heart ached with the weight of that trust. He had never been responsible for anyone but himself before, and now he was the protector of 3 children whose fate could determine the future of the galaxy. They spent the next few hours resting in the shade of the canyon, the oppressive heat of the desert kept at bay by the towering cliffs. Kalen kept a constant watch, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, but by midday, the calm was shattered. A distant rumble echoed through the canyon, followed by the unmistakable sound of engines. Kalen's stomach dropped as he recognized the noise. Hoverbikes, at least half a dozen of them, closing in fast. "Get to the cave," Kalen ordered, his voice sharp. "Now." The triplets didn't hesitate. They scrambled toward a nearby cave, their small bodies moving with surprising speed. Kalen pulled out his blaster, positioning himself behind a boulder for cover as the sound of the hoverbikes grew louder. Within moments, the Syndicate's forces came into view, 6 heavily armed mercenaries on sleek, black hoverbikes, their faces obscured by dark helmets. They moved with military precision, fanning out to cover the entrance to the canyon. Kalen's heart raced as he fired the first shot, taking out the lead rider with a well-placed blast. The mercenary fell from his bike, crashing into the sand with a dull thud. The others immediately returned fire, their blasters sending bright streaks of energy through the air. Kalen ducked behind the boulder, his mind racing. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and the Syndicate's forces were closing in fast. But he had to buy the children time to escape, time to survive. As he fired off another shot, taking out a second mercenary, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the very air around him had shifted, becoming heavier, more charged with energy. Kalen glanced toward the cave, and his eyes widened in shock. The triplets, huddled together at the entrance of the cave, were glowing. Ion, Kale, and Rhea stood side by side, their small bodies radiating with a soft, green light. Their eyes were closed, their faces calm, as if they were in a trance. The energy surrounding them was palpable, like a force of nature waiting to be unleashed. Kalen had seen them use their powers before, but never like this. This was something different, something far more powerful. Before he could fully process what was happening, the ground beneath the Syndicate's mercenaries began to tremble. The sand shifted and twisted, rising up in tendrils that wrapped around the hoverbikes, pulling them down into the earth. The mercenaries shouted in confusion, their bikes sinking into the sand as if the desert itself had turned against them. They fired wildly in all directions, but their blasters were useless against the forces that now held them captive. Kalen watched in awe as the triplets, their powers fully awakened, brought the Syndicate's forces to their knees. The mercenaries, once so confident and dangerous, were now helpless, trapped by the very desert they had tried to conquer. Within moments, it was over. The mercenaries lay unconscious, their bikes half buried in the sand. The canyon was silent once more, the only sound the faint rustling of the wind. Kalen approached the triplets cautiously, his heart still racing from the intensity of the battle. Ion, Kale, and Rhea slowly opened their eyes, the green glow fading from their bodies as they looked up at him. "Are you okay?" Kalen asked, his voice soft. Ion nodded, though his expression was troubled. "We didn't mean to, it just happened." Kalen smiled, kneeling down in front of them. "You saved us. You did what you had to do." Kale glanced at the unconscious mercenaries, his brow furrowed. "They'll come back. More of them." Kalen's smile faded as the reality of their situation set in. Kale was right. The Syndicate wouldn't stop. "This was just the beginning, we need to keep moving," Kalen said, standing up. "There's a place we can go. Somewhere safe." Ion, Kale, and Rhea exchanged a glance, their bond unspoken but clear. "Where?" Ion asked. Kalen's jaw tightened. "To the one place where no one will dare follow us." Chapter 6, A Path to the Stars. As the sun set behind the jagged cliffs of the canyon, Kalen's hovercraft sped through the desert night. He had made a decision, one that filled him with both dread and determination. There was only one place left where they might find sanctuary, one place that was so dangerous, so well protected, that not even the Syndicate would follow them. The Galactic Council's capital, Tarakis Prime. The Council was the only authority in the galaxy with the power to stand against the Syndicate, and Kalen knew that if anyone could help the children, it would be the Council. But the path to Tarakis Prime was treacherous, and even if they made it there, convincing the Council to protect the children would be no easy task. For now, they would have to travel through the Outer Rim, a lawless region filled with smugglers, pirates, and mercenaries. It was a place Kalen knew well, having spent much of his life there as a bounty hunter. But this time, he wasn't traveling alone. He had the children to protect, and that meant taking every precaution to ensure their safety. As they moved deeper into the outer rim, Kalen's thoughts drifted back to the Syndicate and the forces that had pursued them. He knew that Dravik, the leader of the Syndicate, wouldn't rest until the children were captured. The power they possessed, the power of the Zyran bloodline, was too valuable to be left in the hands of anyone else. Kalen glanced over his shoulder at the triplets, who were huddled together in the back of the hovercraft, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the ship's controls. They were silent, but he could feel the tension radiating from them. The battle in the canyon had taken its toll, and Kalen knew they were struggling to understand the full extent of their abilities. "We'll be safe soon," Kalen said, though the words felt hollow. Safety was a fleeting concept in this galaxy, especially for children as unique as these. Ion, ever the leader, met Kalen's gaze with a steady, determined look. "We'll be ready for whatever comes next." Kalen nodded, though in his heart, he wondered if anyone could truly be ready for what lay ahead. The galaxy was vast, and its dangers were many. But together, they would face whatever came their way. The journey to Taraki's prime had begun. The remaining chapters will continue to delve deeper into the children's powers, their connection to the Zyran Empire, and the growing danger from the Syndicate and other galactic forces. Their journey through the Outer Rim, encounters with allies and enemies, and their ultimate confrontation with the Galactic Council will shape the fate of the galaxy. Each chapter will further develop the characters and the stakes as they move closer to their destiny as heirs to a lost empire. Chapter 7: The Outer Rim. The outer rim of the galaxy was a dangerous, lawless stretch of space where only the most desperate or daring dared venture. Kalen had traversed it many times during his years as a bounty hunter, but this time felt different. He wasn't alone, and the stakes were higher than ever. The triplets sat quietly in the back of the hovercraft as they sped across the vast desert, their faces a mix of wonder and fear as they stared out at the alien landscapes passing by. Kalen knew they had to keep moving. The Syndicate's forces were relentless, and even though the children had displayed incredible power back in the canyon, it was only a matter of time before their enemies returned, stronger and more prepared. They needed a plan, a way to get out of the Outer Rim and closer to the Galactic Council's reach, where the Syndicate's influence would be weakened. The hovercraft's navigation system beeped, drawing Kalen's attention to a blinking icon on the screen. It was an old outpost, one that had once been used by smugglers to trade illicit goods, located just a few hours from their current position. Kalen knew it would be risky, but they needed supplies, and the outpost might be their best chance to rest and regroup. "We'll stop soon," Kalen said, glancing over his shoulder at the children. "There's an outpost nearby where we can get what we need." Ion nodded, his green eyes serious. "Will it be safe?" Kalen hesitated, then shrugged. "Safe enough. It's better than being out here with no food or water." Kale, who had been silent for most of the journey, spoke up. "What if they're waiting for us there?" "The Syndicate?" Kalen's jaw tightened. Kale's fear was valid. The Syndicate had spies everywhere, and there was no telling how far their reach extended. But they had no other choice. "We'll have to be careful. Stay close to me, and don't trust anyone. Understand?" All three children nodded in unison, their faces somber. Kalen knew they understood the gravity of the situation, but he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for dragging them into a world filled with danger and violence. A few hours later, they arrived at the outpost, a crumbling structure nestled against a series of jagged cliffs. It was larger than Kalen had expected, with several hangars, supply depots, and makeshift barracks scattered across the complex. A few scruffy-looking travelers wandered between buildings, their eyes darting nervously as they went about their business. It was the kind of place where you kept your head down and didn't ask questions. Kalen parked the hovercraft in a small hangar and turned to the triplets. "Stay close. Don't wander off. We're here for supplies, nothing else." They stepped out of the vehicle, the hot desert air immediately enveloping them. The children clustered around Kalen, their eyes wide as they took in the sights of the outpost. To them, this must have seemed like a strange and dangerous world, so different from the ruined ship where they had spent their early lives. Kalen led them toward one of the supply depots, his hand resting on the blaster at his side. As they walked, he kept a careful eye on their surroundings, scanning for any sign of danger. The outpost was busy, but not crowded. It was the kind of place where deals were made in hushed tones, and everyone was watching for an opportunity to turn a quick profit. As they approached the depot, a tall, thin man with oily skin and sunken eyes stepped out to meet them. His clothes were patched and worn, but his eyes gleamed with the sharpness of a predator sizing up prey. "Looking for something?" the man asked, his voice a raspy whisper. Kalen didn't like the look of him, but they needed supplies, and this was the only place for miles. "We need food, water, and fuel." The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "Of course. I've got what you need, for the right price." Kalen narrowed his eyes. "How much?" The man scratched his chin, glancing over at the triplets. "Depends. Who are the kids?" Kalen's hand moved subtly to his blaster, but he kept his voice calm. "They're none of your business." The man's smile widened. "Everything's my business in this outpost, friend. But I'm a reasonable man. Let's just say, 500 credits for everything you need. No questions asked." Kalen's teeth clenched. 500 credits was an outrageous price, but he didn't have the luxury of bargaining. They needed supplies, and they needed to keep moving. "Deal." The man grinned, rubbing his hands together. "Pleasure doing business with you." As Kalen handed over the credits, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His instincts, honed over years of surviving in the galaxy's most dangerous places, were screaming at him to get out of the outpost as quickly as possible. "We're leaving," he said to the children once the transaction was complete. "Stay close." But as they turned to leave, the man called out, "Oh, and by the way, I wouldn't hang around here too long if I were you. Word is, the syndicate's got some business in this sector." Kalen didn't respond, but his pulse quickened. He had been right, the syndicate wasn't far behind. They hurried back to the hovercraft, loading the supplies as quickly as possible. The tension was palpable, and Kalen could feel the eyes of the outpost's inhabitants on them. It was only a matter of time before someone tipped off the syndicate. Just as they were about to climb into the hovercraft, a familiar hum filled the air, the unmistakable sound of approaching hoverbikes. Kalen cursed under his breath. "Get in, now." The children scrambled into the hovercraft as Kalen fired up the engine. The hoverbikes were closing in fast, their riders barely visible in the distance, but Kalen didn't wait to find out who they were. He gunned the engine, and the hovercraft shot forward, kicking up a cloud of dust as they sped away from the outpost. But the hoverbikes were faster. Within minutes, the riders were upon them, their blasters firing in rapid succession. Kalen swerved the hovercraft to avoid the incoming shots, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hold on," he shouted, gripping the controls as the craft bounced over the uneven terrain. Ion, Kale, and Rhea huddled together in the back, their faces pale with fear. Kalen's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the hoverbikes forever, and their blasters were too powerful to keep dodging. He needed to do something fast. As the hoverbikes drew closer, one of the riders pulled ahead, aiming his blaster directly at Kalen. Time seemed to slow as Kalen's fingers tightened around his own blaster. He fired, the shot hitting the rider square in the chest. The man tumbled off his hoverbike, disappearing into the dust cloud behind them. But more were coming. "Get ready," Kalen said through gritted teeth. "We're going to have to fight our way out of this." Ion, always the quickest to act, nodded. "What do you need us to do?" Kalen glanced back at him, impressed by the boy's courage. "Use your powers, but be careful. We can't afford to let them get too close." Ion nodded, his green eyes glowing faintly as he focused his energy. Beside him, Kale and Rhea did the same, their powers awakening as the danger closed in around them. With a sudden surge of power, the desert sand around them began to shift and swirl. The hoverbikes, which had been gaining on them, were suddenly caught in a vortex of sand, their riders struggling to maintain control. Kalen used the opportunity to speed up, putting some distance between them and their pursuers. But the hoverbike riders were relentless. Even as they fought against the sandstorm the children had created, they continued to fire at the hovercraft. One shot hit the side of the craft, causing it to lurch violently to the left, Kalen struggled to keep the vehicle under control, his hands gripping the controls tightly as he swerved to avoid another barrage of blaster fire. But just as it seemed like the hoverbikes would overwhelm them, Rhea raised her hand, her eyes glowing with a soft, green light. A wave of energy rippled out from her, enveloping the hovercraft in a protective shield. The hoverbike's blasters fired again, but this time, the shots bounced harmlessly off the shield, the energy dissipating in the air around them. Kalen's heart raced as he glanced back at Rhea, his eyes wide with amazement. He had known the children were powerful, but this was something else entirely. "Keep it up!" Kalen shouted, pushing the hovercraft to its limits as they sped toward the canyon's edge. With the hoverbikes temporarily stalled by Rhea's shield, Kalen saw his chance. The canyon up ahead was narrow and treacherous, but it was their only hope. If they could make it through, the hoverbikes wouldn't be able to follow. He gunned the engine, the hovercraft surging forward as they raced toward the canyon. The walls of the canyon rose up on either side of them, the narrow path barely wide enough for the hovercraft to fit through, but they made it. Kalen let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding as the hoverbikes fell behind, unable to navigate the narrow passage. The danger had passed, for now, but as they emerged from the canyon and into the open desert once more, Kalen knew the syndicate wouldn't stop. They would keep coming, keep hunting, until they had what they wanted, and the only way to stop them was to get to the Galactic Council. Chapter 8. The Galactic Council beckons. The syndicate had proven that their reach was vast, and no corner of the galaxy was safe for the children. Kalen knew the time had come to make their final push toward Taraki's Prime, the heart of the Galactic Council. It was a place where laws held some weight, where the syndicate's influence would be curbed by the presence of the galaxy's most powerful and respected governing body. But getting there would not be easy. They would have to travel through some of the most dangerous sectors of the galaxy, avoiding not only syndicate agents, but also the lawless pirates and mercenaries who thrived in the chaos of the outer rim. As they sped across the desert toward the nearest spaceport, Kalen glanced back at the triplets, who were still huddled together in the back of the hovercraft. "You did good back there," Kalen said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of their shared experiences. "But this isn't over. The syndicate will keep coming, and we're running out of places to hide." Ion met his gaze, his expression calm but determined. "We'll make it to the council." "We have to." Kalen nodded. He wasn't sure what would happen when they arrived at Taraki's Prime, but he knew one thing for certain: the triplets were the key to something far greater than any of them had imagined, and whatever their future held, he would stand by their side. Chapter 9. A desperate escape. Kalen's heart raced as the spaceport loomed in the distance, a sprawling hub of ships and travelers. The massive structure was a stark contrast to the endless desert surrounding it, like an oasis of metal and life in a barren wasteland. It was here that they would make their escape from Zarath Prime. But even as Kalen steered the hovercraft toward the towering gates, he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in on them. They had escaped the syndicate's forces in the canyon, but Kalen knew it was only a matter of time before more hunters arrived. The syndicate had resources that spanned the galaxy, and now that they knew the triplets were alive, they wouldn't rest until they had them in their grasp. The spaceport was their only chance to get off-world, to flee to Taraki's Prime, where the Galactic Council might offer some measure of protection. But getting there would be a challenge in itself. The spaceport was heavily guarded, with mercenaries and bounty hunters constantly on the lookout for anyone with a price on their head. Kalen had a feeling his name would be on that list soon, if it wasn't already. As they approached the gates, Kalen pulled the hovercraft to a stop and turned to the triplets, his expression grim. "We need to be careful in there. Stay close to me, and don't draw any attention. This place is crawling with people who would sell us out to the highest bidder if they knew who you were." Ion, the eldest, nodded solemnly. "We'll do whatever it takes." Rhea, who had grown more confident since the battle in the canyon, tightened her grip on Kale's hand. "We won't let them take us." Kalen gave them a curt nod, then led the way into the spaceport. The noise and bustle of the place hit them immediately, crowds of travelers, traders, and mercenaries moving about in every direction. It was a melting pot of species and cultures, a chaotic whirlwind of activity that made it difficult to focus. Kalen's eyes darted around, scanning the faces of the people they passed. He could feel the weight of their stares, the suspicion in their eyes. To them, he was just another traveler, but with 3 alien children in tow, he knew they stood out more than he would have liked. They weaved through the crowds, making their way toward the docking bays where the ships were lined up, ready for departure. Kalen had already identified a freighter that was scheduled to leave for the Outer Rim, an old cargo hauler run by a smuggler he had dealt with in the past. It wasn't the fastest ship, but it would get them off Zara-TH Prime without raising too many questions. But just as they neared the docking bay, Kalen spotted something that made his blood run cold: a group of syndicate soldiers, heavily armed and scanning the crowds. They hadn't spotted him yet, but it was only a matter of time. "Move," Kalen hissed under his breath, quickening his pace. The triplets followed close behind, their eyes wide with fear as they sensed the danger. They reached the docking bay just as the freighter's crew was preparing to load the final crates of cargo. Kalen approached the captain, a grizzled old man with a cybernetic eye, and handed him a small pouch of credits. "We need passage." "No questions asked," Kalen said, his voice low but firm. The captain glanced at the credits, then at the triplets, his expression skeptical. "That's a lot of heat for 3 kids." Kalen's eyes narrowed. "I've already paid you. Get us on the ship." The captain hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but if the syndicate comes knocking, we're not sticking our necks out for you." Kalen nodded in agreement. "We'll handle it." They boarded the freighter just as the syndicate soldiers entered the docking bay, their weapons drawn as they began questioning the crew. Kalen felt his heart race as he led the triplets into the ship's cargo hold, where they hid among the crates and supplies. The freighter's engines roared to life, and Kalen could feel the vibrations as the ship lifted off the ground, escaping the planet's gravity and heading into the vastness of space. But even as they sped away from Zara-TH Prime, Kalen knew the danger wasn't over. The syndicate wouldn't stop until they had the triplets, and the closer they got to Taraki's Prime, the more dangerous their journey would become. Chapter 10, A Galaxy in Turmoil. The freighter hummed quietly as it sailed through the dark expanse of space, carrying Kalen and the triplets away from Zara-TH Prime. The stars outside the viewport seemed to blur as the ship's engines propelled them forward at an incredible speed. But even in the relative safety of the cargo hold, Kalen couldn't relax. He knew the syndicate wouldn't give up so easily. Kalen sat against a crate, his blaster resting on his lap as he kept watch. The triplets were huddled together on the other side of the hold, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and fear. Ion, always the most composed of the 3, looked over at Kalen. "Do you think we'll make it to Taraki's Prime?" Ion asked, his voice quiet but steady. Kalen didn't want to lie to the boy, but he also didn't want to crush his hopes. "We'll make it," he said, though even he wasn't sure. Kale, who had been quiet for most of the journey, spoke up. "What if they catch us? What if they take us back?" "They won't," Kalen said firmly. "I won't let them." But as the hours passed and the freighter moved deeper into space, Kalen's mind raced with thoughts of what might come next. Taraki's Prime was the heart of the Galactic Council, a massive city-planet where the galaxy's most powerful leaders gathered to make decisions that affected billions of lives. It was a place of politics and intrigue, where alliances were formed and broken in the blink of an eye. Kalen knew that bringing the triplets to the council was their best chance for survival, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. The council was notoriously slow to act, and convincing them to take action against the syndicate would be a monumental task. As the freighter neared the Outer Rim, the crew began to stir, preparing for their next stop. Kalen knew they couldn't stay on the ship for long. Eventually, someone would realize who they were, and the syndicate would come calling. "We're close," Kalen said to the triplets as they gathered their belongings. "Once we get to Taraki's Prime, we'll find a way to get in front of the council. But we need to be careful. The syndicate has spies everywhere." Rhea, who had grown quieter as the journey went on, looked up at Kalen with wide, fearful eyes. "What if they don't believe us? What if they send us away?" Kalen knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I won't let that happen. We'll make them listen." As the freighter docked at a remote station on the edge of the Outer Rim, Kalen led the triplets off the ship and into the busy spaceport. The station was a hub of activity, with traders, smugglers, and mercenaries moving about in every direction. It was the kind of place where you could disappear if you knew how to blend in, but even as they moved through the crowds, Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His hand hovered near his blaster, his eyes scanning the faces of the people they passed. They made their way to a small shuttle that would take them the rest of the way to Taraki's Prime. The journey would be long, but Kalen knew it was their best shot at getting the triplets in front of the council. As they boarded the shuttle and settled into their seats, Kalen felt a sense of unease settle over him. The syndicate was still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had the children. The closer they got to Taraki's Prime, the more dangerous their journey would become, but Kalen had made a promise to protect the triplets, no matter the cost. And he intended to keep that promise. Chapter 11. The approach to Taraki's Prime. The shuttle's engines hummed as it shot through hyperspace, its passengers wrapped in a tense silence. Kalen sat at the front of the shuttle, his eyes fixed on the shimmering stars outside the viewport. The triplets were seated behind him, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and fear as they stared at the vastness of space. Taraki's Prime was only hours away now, a beacon of hope in the dark galaxy. It was the heart of the Galactic Council, a sprawling metropolis built on a massive planet-sized space station. Kalen had never been there himself, but he had heard stories of its gleaming towers, its bustling marketplaces, and its endless political intrigue. For the triplets, it represented a chance for safety, a place where the syndicate's reach would be limited. But Kalen knew that reaching Taraki's Prime was only half the battle. The Galactic Council was a bureaucratic machine, slow to act and resistant to change. Convincing them to protect the children and take a stand against the syndicate would be no easy task. As the shuttle neared the end of its journey, Kalen turned to the triplets, his face serious. "We're almost there. Once we land, we'll need to find a way to get in front of the council. But we can't draw attention to ourselves. The syndicate likely has spies on Taraki's Prime." Ion nodded, his face set with determination. "We'll do whatever it takes." Kale, who had been unusually quiet for much of the journey, spoke up. "What if they don't listen? What if they send us away?" "They'll listen," Kalen said, though he wasn't entirely sure. "They have to." Rhea, ever the optimist, leaned forward. "They'll help us." "I know they will." Kalen wished he shared her confidence. The Galactic Council was as likely to turn them away as they were to offer protection, and if the syndicate got to them first, the consequences would be catastrophic. As the shuttle emerged from hyperspace, the looming figure of Taraki's Prime came into view. It was massive, a sprawling network of cityscapes built on the surface of a planet-sized station. Hundreds of ships moved in and out of its docking ports, their lights flickering in the darkness like fireflies in the night. The shuttle entered one of the main docking bays, its engines powering down as it came to a smooth stop. Kalen could feel the tension in the air as they prepared to disembark. This was it, the moment they had been racing toward for so long. But as they stepped off the shuttle and into the bustling spaceport, Kalen's heart sank. There, standing at the edge of the docking bay, were two figures clad in the unmistakable armor of syndicate enforcers. Chapter 12. The Council's influence. The sight of the syndicate enforcers sent a shock of adrenaline coursing through Kalen's veins. He instinctively stepped in front of the triplets, shielding them from view as the two enforcers scanned the crowd, their eyes searching for their targets. "They're here," Ion whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Kalen's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. The spaceport was too crowded for a fight, and any sudden movements would draw attention to them. They needed to find a way to blend in, to disappear among the masses until they could make their way to the Galactic Council chambers. "Stay close to me," Kalen murmured, his hand hovering near his blaster. "We need to move fast, but we can't let them see us." The triplets nodded, their faces pale as they followed Kalen through the throngs of people. The spaceport was a chaotic whirlwind of activity, with travelers rushing to and from ships, vendors hawking their wares, and security droids patrolling the area. Kalen kept his head down, weaving through the crowd with the triplets close behind. Every step felt like a gamble, every glance over his shoulder filled with the fear that the enforcers would spot them. They made their way toward the exit, the towering spires of Taraki's Prime cityscape looming ahead. The council chambers were located in the heart of the city, a massive complex surrounded by layers of security. If they could just get there, they might have a chance, but as they neared the exit, Kalen's heart sank. The enforcers had spotted them. Go, Kalen hissed, pushing the triplets forward. Run! The triplets bolted, their small bodies darting through the crowd as Kalen turned to face the enforcers. His blaster was in his hand before he even realized it, and he fired 2 quick shots, forcing the enforcers to dive for cover. The crowd erupted into chaos as people screamed and scattered, ducking behind stalls and crates to avoid the firefight. Kalen fired again, hitting one of the enforcers in the leg, but the other was already returning fire, his blaster shots whizzing past Kalen's head. Kalen ducked behind a pillar, his mind racing. He couldn't take them both on, he needed to buy time for the triplets to escape. He fired another shot, then bolted after the triplets, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the enforcers behind him, their footsteps echoing in the chaos of the spaceport, but as he rounded a corner, he felt a sharp pain in his side. One of the enforcer's blaster shots had grazed him, and the searing heat of the wound made him stumble. Kalen! Ion's voice rang out from ahead. Kalen gritted his teeth, pushing through the pain as he caught up to the triplets. Keep going, he gasped. Don't stop. They raced through the streets of Taraki's Prime, the enforcers hot on their heels. Kalen's mind was a blur of pain and desperation, but he forced himself to keep moving. They couldn't be caught, not now, not when they were so close. The towering structure of the council chambers came into view, its gleaming spires rising high above the city. It was surrounded by security droids, their glowing eyes scanning the streets for any sign of trouble. This way! Kalen shouted, leading the triplets toward the entrance, but just as they reached the gates, the enforcers caught up with them. Stop! One of the enforcers barked, leveling his blaster at Kalen. Kalen turned to face them, his own blaster raised, but before he could fire, something strange happened. The air around the triplets seemed to shimmer, and a wave of energy pulsed out from them, knocking the enforcers off their feet. Kalen stared in shock as the triplets' eyes glowed with a soft, green light. Their powers, which had been growing stronger with each passing day, had once again saved them, but there was no time to celebrate. The gates of the council chamber swung open, and a group of security droids rushed out to meet them. Stop, one of the droids commanded. You are under arrest for, we need to see the council. Kalen shouted, stepping forward. These children, before he could finish, a voice rang out from behind the droids. Let them through. Kalen turned to see a tall, imposing figure striding toward them, a council member, dressed in the regal robes of the Galactic Council. His eyes were sharp, and his expression unreadable as he approached. You claim to have something of importance for the council? The man asked, his voice cool and measured. Kalen nodded. These children, they're the last of the Zyran bloodline. They're the key to, the council member's eyes widened, and for the first time, Kalen saw a flicker of emotion on his face. Bring them inside, the man said, his voice urgent. The council must hear this. Chapter 13, The Council's Dilemma. Inside the council chambers, the air was thick with tension. Kalen stood with the triplets at his side, facing a semicircle of council members seated behind a long, ornate table. The room was massive, with towering windows that looked out over the city, but the grandeur of the place did little to ease Kalen's nerves. The council members were a diverse group, humans, aliens, and synthetic beings from every corner of the galaxy, each representing a different faction or planet. At the center of the group sat the man who had allowed them entry, his piercing gaze fixed on Kalen as he listened to his story. The syndicate is after them, Kalen explained, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. They won't stop until they have the triplets. And if they succeed, they'll use their power to seize control of the galaxy. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, their faces betraying a mixture of skepticism and concern. And you expect us to believe that these children, one of the council members, an elderly woman with sharp features, said, are the last of the Zyran bloodline? Kalen nodded. I've seen their powers. They're real, and they're growing stronger. The elderly woman leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. Even if what you say is true, what do you expect us to do? The syndicate has influence in every corner of the galaxy. If we take a stand against them, it could ignite a war. Kalen's jaw tightened. If you do nothing, the syndicate will seize control anyway. You've seen what they're capable of. They've been expanding their reach for years, and now, with the triplets, they have the power to take over everything. The council chambers fell into an uneasy silence as the members considered Kalen's words. The triplets stood quietly beside him, their faces pale but determined. Ion, ever the leader, stepped forward. Please, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We didn't ask for any of this. We just want to be safe. The council members exchanged another round of glances, their expressions softening slightly as they looked at the children. The man at the center of the group leaned forward, his eyes thoughtful. We will deliberate, he said, his voice calm but firm. For now, you and the children will remain under the council's protection. Kalen let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. They were led out of the council chambers and into a secure holding area. Kalen couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, they were safe, at least for now, but even as they settled into the relative comfort of the council's protection, Kalen knew that the battle was far from over. The syndicate wouldn't stop, and the council's decision was far from certain. The fate of the galaxy, and the triplets, hung in the balance. Chapter 14, The Syndicate Strikes Back. The protection of the Galactic Council brought a temporary sense of safety, but Kalen knew it wouldn't last. The syndicate was relentless, and they wouldn't allow the council's interference to go unanswered. Even as the triplets slept soundly in the secure quarters provided by the council, Kalen's mind raced with the knowledge that their enemies were still out there, plotting their next move. The council's deliberations dragged on for days, with no word on whether they would offer full protection to the children or turn them over to the syndicate in exchange for peace. Kalen had seen it all before, bureaucracy at its worst, slow to act and full of backroom deals that favored the highest bidder. But the syndicate wasn't waiting for a decision. Late one night, as Kalen stood guard over the triplets, a low hum filled the air, barely audible, but enough to make his hair stand on end. His instincts, honed over years of surviving in the galaxy's most dangerous corners, told him that something was wrong. He moved quickly, checking the security systems in the room. Everything appeared normal, but Kalen had learned to trust his instincts. He grabbed his blaster and moved toward the door, his senses on high alert. That's when the lights went out, the room was plunged into darkness, and Kalen's heart raced as he reached for the emergency controls. The security systems were down, disabled by someone with the expertise to bypass the council's advanced defenses. Before he could react, the door slid open with a soft hiss, and two figures stepped into the room, syndicate enforcers, their weapons drawn and their eyes gleaming with malice. Kalen didn't hesitate. He fired the first shot, hitting one of the enforcers square in the chest. The second fired back, but Kalen ducked behind a console, the blaster shot whizzing past his head. The triplets woke with a start, their eyes wide with fear as they scrambled to their feet. Stay back! Kalen shouted, his voice echoing in the darkness. Stay behind me! Ion, always the bravest of the three, stepped forward, his green eyes glowing faintly as he focused his energy. The air around him shimmered, and a wave of force rippled through the room, knocking the second enforcer off his feet. Kalen took the opportunity to fire another shot, hitting the enforcer before he could recover. But the danger wasn't over. More figures appeared in the doorway, for more enforcers, each armed to the teeth and ready for a fight. We need to move. Kalen shouted, grabbing the triplets by the hands and pulling them toward the back of the room. There was a service hatch that led to the lower levels of the council building, a route that Kalen had discovered during their stay. It wasn't meant for escape, but it would have to do. They climbed into the hatch just as the enforcers opened fire, their blaster shots ricocheting off the walls. Kalen led the way, his heart pounding in his chest as they crawled through the narrow passage. We're not safe here, Ion whispered, his voice filled with fear. They're going to keep coming. Kalen nodded grimly. We need to get out of the city. The council's protection isn't enough. They emerged from the hatch into a dimly lit corridor, deep beneath the council building. The sound of blaster fire echoed from above, but for the moment, they were safe. Kalen turned to the triplets, his face set with determination. We're getting out of here. We'll find another way to stop the syndicate. Kale, his eyes wide with fear, looked up at Kalen. But where will we go? Kalen's jaw tightened. There's one place they won't follow us. A place even the syndicate fears. Ion's eyes widened as he realized what Kalen meant. The ZY-RAN homeworld. Kalen nodded. It's our only chance. Chapter 15, The Journey to ZY-RAN. The decision to flee to the ZY-RAN homeworld was a dangerous one, but Kalen knew it was their best chance. The Syndicate's forces were closing in on them, and the Council's protection had proven to be weak at best. The only place they could truly be safe was on the long-abandoned planet that had once been the heart of the ZY-RAN Empire, a place where few dared to venture. The triplets, though frightened, understood the gravity of the situation. Their connection to the ZY-RAN bloodline was undeniable, and they knew that the answers to their powers, and their fate, lay on the mysterious planet. Kalen led them through the darkened corridors of the Council building, avoiding the Syndicate's patrols as they made their way to the lower levels where the Council's private ships were kept. It was risky, but Kalen knew they needed a fast and secure way to leave Taraki's Prime without attracting attention. They reached the docking bay without incident, and Kalen quickly selected a small but powerful ship, a sleek, black cruiser designed for stealth and speed. This will get us where we need to go, Kalen said as he ushered the triplets inside. But once we leave, there's no turning back. Ion, ever the leader, nodded firmly. We're ready. The ship's engines roared to life, and within minutes, they were soaring through the stars, leaving Taraki's Prime behind. Kalen set the coordinates for the ZY-RAN homeworld, a planet that had been forgotten by most of the galaxy, its location known only to HFY. As they traveled through hyperspace, Kalen took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. The triplets had grown stronger with each passing day, their powers becoming more pronounced as they faced one challenge after another. But the journey ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The ZY-RAN homeworld was a place of mystery, its surface covered in ancient ruins and secrets that had been lost to time. The triplets would need to unlock the power of their ancestors if they were to stand a chance against the Syndicate, and Kalen, for all his skills and experience, could only guide them so far. This was their journey now. As the ship neared the end of its journey, Kalen gathered the triplets in the cockpit, his face serious. We're almost there, he said, his voice steady. But this planet, it's not like anything you've ever seen. The ZY-RANs left behind more than just ruins. There's power here, power that could change everything. Ion nodded, his green eyes filled with determination. We'll be ready. Kale and Rhea exchanged a nervous glance, but neither of them wavered. They had come too far to turn back now. The ship emerged from hyperspace, and the ZY-RAN homeworld came into view, a massive planet shrouded in swirling clouds and mystery. The surface was covered in ancient structures, their outlines barely visible through the thick mist that hung over the landscape. Kalen guided the ship toward a landing site near the center of the ruins, his heart pounding with anticipation. This was it, the place where everything would be decided. As the ship touched down, Kalen turned to the triplets, his expression serious. Stay close. We don't know what's waiting for us down there. The triplets nodded, their faces set with determination as they prepared to step onto the planet that held the key to their future. Chapter 16, The Ruins of ZY-RAN. The air on the ZY-RAN homeworld was thick with an ancient energy, a palpable force that seemed to hum beneath the surface of the planet. Kalen could feel it the moment they stepped off the ship, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end as he surveyed the ruins that stretched out before them. The triplets stood beside him, their eyes wide with awe as they took in the massive structures that towered over them. The ruins were ancient, their stone walls etched with intricate carvings that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air was heavy with the weight of history, and Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. This is where it all began, Ion whispered, his voice filled with reverence. The ZY-RAN Empire. Kalen nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his blaster as he scanned the horizon. The ruins were eerily silent, the only sound the faint rustle of the wind as it swept through the crumbling buildings. But Kalen knew better than to let his guard down. The ZY-RANs had left behind more than just ruins, they had left behind secrets, and not all of them were friendly. We need to find the central chamber, Kalen said, his voice low. That's where the key to your powers will be. The triplets followed him as he led the way through the ruins, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The buildings around them were massive, their walls covered in symbols and glyphs that seemed to pulse with a faint energy. It was as if the planet itself was alive, watching their every move. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, the air grew colder, and the light began to fade. Kalen's instincts told him they were getting closer, but the sense of unease that had been growing since they landed was becoming harder to ignore. "We're not alone," Kale whispered, his voice trembling. Kalen stopped in his tracks, his hand moving to his blaster as he scanned the shadows around them. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. But then, from the darkness, came a low growl, a sound that sent a chill down Kalen's spine. "Stay behind me," Kalen ordered, his voice tense. The triplets huddled together as Kalen drew his blaster, his eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of movement. The growl came again, louder this time, and Kalen's heart raced as he realized they were being hunted. Without warning, a massive creature lunged out of the shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on Kalen. It was unlike anything Kalen had ever seen, a towering beast with razor-sharp claws and skin that seemed to shift and shimmer in the dim light. Kalen fired his blaster, but the creature was too fast. It dodged the shot and charged at him, its jaws snapping as it closed the distance. But before the creature could reach him, Ion stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a bright green light. The air around him shimmered, and a wave of energy shot out from his hands, slamming into the creature and sending it crashing into the ruins. Kalen stared in awe as the creature roared in pain, its body writhing as it tried to regain its footing. But Ion wasn't finished. With a determined look on his face, he raised his hands again, and the energy around him intensified, wrapping around the creature and holding it in place. Kale and Rhea joined in, their eyes glowing with the same green light as they focused their energy on the creature. Together, the triplets unleashed a force unlike anything Kalen had ever seen, their powers combining to create a massive wave of energy that engulfed the creature and tore it apart. The ruins fell silent once more as the creature disintegrated, its body dissolving into the air. Kalen lowered his blaster, his heart still racing as he looked at the triplets. They were breathing heavily, their faces pale, but their eyes were filled with determination. "We're getting stronger," Ion said, his voice quiet but firm. Kalen nodded, his mind racing. The triplets' powers were growing at an alarming rate, but they still didn't fully understand how to control them. And as they ventured deeper into the ruins, Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. "We need to keep moving," Kalen said, his voice tense. "The central chamber is close." They continued their journey through the ruins, the air growing colder with each step. The carvings on the walls became more intricate, their glow brighter as they neared the heart of the Zyran Empire. And then, at last, they found it, the central chamber. The room was massive, its walls covered in glowing symbols that pulsed with energy. At the center of the room stood a massive stone pedestal, its surface etched with the same intricate carvings that adorned the rest of the ruins. "This is it," Kalen said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The heart of the Zyran Empire." The triplets stepped forward, their eyes wide as they approached the pedestal. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and Kalen could feel the power radiating from the chamber. As they reached the pedestal, the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, their light filling the room. The triplets placed their hands on the pedestal, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. The room was filled with a blinding light, and Kalen shielded his eyes as the energy in the chamber surged. The triplets stood at the center of it all, their bodies glowing with the same green light that had saved them so many times before. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, and the room fell silent. The triplets stood before the pedestal, their faces filled with a new sense of purpose. "We know what we have to do," Ion said, his voice steady. Kalen nodded, his heart pounding with anticipation. The triplets had unlocked the power of the Zyrans, and now, they were ready to face the Syndicate. But even as they prepared for the final battle, Kalen knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger. The Syndicate would stop at nothing to capture the triplets, and the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. Chapter 17, The Final Battle. The air was thick with tension as Kalen and the triplets made their way back to the ship. The Zyran homeworld had given them the answers they had been seeking, but it had also given them something far more powerful, the strength to face the Syndicate head-on. The triplets had unlocked the full extent of their powers, and Kalen could feel the change in them. They were no longer the frightened children he had found in the wreckage of the Zyran ship. They were confident, determined, and ready to face whatever came next. As they boarded the ship, Kalen set the coordinates for their next destination, the Syndicate's stronghold. It was a dangerous move, but Kalen knew it was the only way to end this once and for all. The Syndicate had been hunting them for too long, and it was time to take the fight to them. The triplets sat quietly in the cockpit, their eyes focused on the stars outside the viewport. Kalen could feel the tension in the air, but there was also a sense of calm. The triplets knew what they had to do, and they were ready. As the ship neared the Syndicate's stronghold, Kalen's heart raced with anticipation. The Syndicate had fortified their base, and Kalen knew they would be facing an army of enforcers and mercenaries. But the triplets were stronger now, and Kalen had no doubt that they could handle whatever came their way. The ship touched down on the surface of the Syndicate's planet, and Kalen led the triplets out into the open air. The stronghold loomed ahead of them, its dark spires rising high into the sky like a fortress of evil. Kalen's hand rested on his blaster as they approached the entrance, but before they could reach it, the doors swung open, and a group of Syndicate enforcers stepped out to meet them. "You're making a mistake," one of the enforcers growled, his blaster aimed at Kalen. "The Syndicate doesn't take kindly to trespassers." Kalen didn't flinch. "We're here for Dravik. Stand down, and we won't have to hurt you." The enforcer sneered. "You're outnumbered." Ion stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a bright green light. "We won't ask again." The enforcers hesitated, their eyes darting between Kalen and the triplets. They had heard the stories, the rumors of the Zyran heirs and their incredible powers. And now, faced with the reality of it, they weren't so sure of themselves. Before the enforcers could react, Ion raised his hand, and a wave of energy shot out from him, slamming into the enforcers and sending them flying. The rest of the group scattered, their confidence shattered as they retreated back into the stronghold. Kalen led the triplets inside, his heart pounding with adrenaline as they moved through the dark corridors. The Syndicate's base was massive, but Kalen knew where they needed to go, the central command center, where Dravik would be waiting. As they made their way deeper into the stronghold, they encountered more resistance, groups of enforcers and mercenaries who tried to stop them at every turn. But the triplets were unstoppable. Their powers had grown to a level that Kalen could barely comprehend, and they moved through the stronghold like a force of nature, taking down anyone who stood in their way. Finally, they reached the command center, and the massive doors slid open to reveal Dravik standing at the center of the room, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You've made a grave mistake coming here," Dravik said, his voice cold and menacing. "The Syndicate controls the galaxy. You can't stop us." Ion stepped forward, his eyes glowing with the same green light that had saved them so many times before. "We're not here to stop you. We're here to end you." Dravik's face twisted into a snarl as he raised his blaster, but before he could fire, the triplets unleashed their full power. The room was filled with a blinding light as the air around them shimmered with energy. Kalen watched in awe as the triplets combined their powers, creating a massive wave of force that rippled through the command center. Dravik screamed in rage as he was engulfed by the energy, his body disintegrating into nothingness. The stronghold shook as the Syndicate's forces crumbled, their leader destroyed and their power shattered. Kalen let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding as the room fell silent. The battle was over, and the Syndicate was no more. The triplets stood at the center of the room, their faces filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. They had done it. They had unlocked the power of their ancestors, and with it, they had defeated the Syndicate. But even as they stood in the aftermath of the battle, Kalen knew that their journey wasn't over. The galaxy was still in turmoil, and the triplets' powers were still growing. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the triplets were no longer just heirs to a forgotten empire. They were the key to the future of the galaxy. Chapter 18, The Road Ahead. With the Syndicate defeated and Dravik gone, Kalen and the triplets returned to the Zyran homeworld to regroup. The journey had been long and filled with danger, but they had emerged victorious, their powers stronger than ever before. But even in victory, Kalen knew that their journey was far from over. The triplets had unlocked the full extent of their powers, but they still didn't fully understand what those powers meant. The Zyran Empire had been one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, and the triplets were its last heirs. As they stood in the central chamber of the Zyran ruins, Kalen could feel the weight of the future pressing down on them. The galaxy was still in turmoil, and the triplets' powers could either save it or destroy it. "We've come so far," Ion said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But what do we do now?" Kalen placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his face serious. "We keep moving forward. The galaxy needs you. The council needs you. And there's still so much we don't know about your powers." Kale and Rhea nodded in agreement, their faces filled with determination. "We're ready," Kale said, his voice steady. "Whatever comes next, we're ready." Kalen smiled, his heart swelling with pride. The triplets had grown so much since he had found them in the wreckage of the Zyran ship. They had faced danger at every turn, but they had come out stronger for it. They left the Zyran ruins and boarded their ship. Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only just beginning. The galaxy was a vast and dangerous place, and the triplets' powers were still evolving, but for the first time in a long time, Kalen felt a sense of hope. They had defeated the Syndicate. They had unlocked the power of their ancestors. And now, they were ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 19, A New Dawn. The trip back to Taraki's Prime was quiet, the hum of the ship's engines the only sound as Kalen and the triplets made their way back to the Galactic Council. The Syndicate had been defeated, and the triplets had proven themselves as the last heirs of the Zyran Empire, but Kalen knew that their victory was only the beginning. The galaxy was still in turmoil, and the council would have questions about the triplets, their powers, and what role they would play in the future of the galaxy. As the ship landed on Taraki's Prime, Kalen felt a sense of unease settle over him. The council chambers loomed ahead, a reminder of the political games that were still at play. The triplets followed Kalen as they made their way through the city, their faces set with determination. They had unlocked the power of the Zyran bloodline, but they still didn't fully understand what that power meant. As they entered the council chambers, the room fell silent. The council members, who had once been skeptical of the triplets' claims, now looked at them with a mixture of awe and respect. "You've returned," the head of the council said, his voice filled with curiosity. "And I see you've been successful." Ion stepped forward, his face calm but confident. "The Syndicate is no more. We've defeated Dravik, and the galaxy is free from his control." The council members exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "But what now?" one of the council members asked, her voice filled with concern. "What will you do with your powers?" Ion's eyes glowed faintly as he considered the question. "We'll use them to protect the galaxy. The Zyran Empire may be gone, but its legacy lives on in us." The room fell into an uneasy silence as the council members considered Ion's words. The triplets had proven themselves capable of incredible power, but that power also came with great responsibility. Kalen stepped forward, his voice steady. "They're not just heirs to the Zyran Empire. They're the future of the galaxy. With the council's support, they can bring balance and peace to the galaxy." The head of the council nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Very well. The council will support you, but know this, your journey is far from over. There are still forces at play in the galaxy that would seek to control your powers. You must remain vigilant." Ion nodded, his face filled with determination. "We will." As they left the council chambers, Kalen couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The triplets had proven themselves, and the council had acknowledged their importance. But even as they celebrated their victory, Kalen knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. The galaxy was vast, and the triplets' powers were still evolving. But with the council's support and their newfound strength, Kalen knew that they could face whatever came next. As they boarded their ship and prepared for the next leg of their journey, Kalen smiled. The triplets were no longer just children, they were the heirs to a legacy that would shape the future of the galaxy, and Kalen would be with them every step of the way. Chapter 20, The Legacy of Zyran. The stars stretched out before them as Kalen and the triplets soared through the galaxy, their ship cutting through the vast expanse of space. The galaxy was a different place now, free from the grip of the syndicate, but Kalen knew that their journey was far from over. The triplets had unlocked the power of their ancestors, and with it, they had become the most powerful beings in the galaxy. But that power also came with great responsibility, and Kalen knew that there would always be those who sought to control them. As they traveled from planet to planet, helping those in need and bringing balance to the galaxy, Kalen couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The triplets had come so far since he had found them in the wreckage of the Zyran ship. They had faced danger at every turn, but they had emerged stronger for it. But even as they celebrated their victories, Kalen knew that the galaxy was still full of challenges. There were still forces at play, hidden powers and old enemies, who would stop at nothing to seize control of the Zyran legacy. One night, as they traveled through the stars, Kalen sat with Ion, Kale, and Rhea, watching the stars twinkle in the distance. "We've come a long way," Kalen said, his voice filled with pride. Ion nodded, his eyes glowing faintly as he gazed out at the stars. "But there's still so much to do." Kale, always the thoughtful one, smiled. "We're ready for whatever comes next." Rhea, her eyes filled with determination, leaned forward. "We're the last of the Zyrans, but we're not alone. We have each other." Kalen smiled, his heart swelling with pride. The triplets were no longer just heirs to a forgotten empire, they were the future of the galaxy, and whatever challenges lay ahead, Kalen knew that they would face them together. As the ship soared through the stars, leaving a trail of light in its wake, Kalen felt a sense of peace settle over him. The galaxy was vast, and the journey was far from over, but with the triplets by his side, he knew that they could face anything. The legacy of Zyran would live on in them, and with it, they would shape the future of the galaxy together.